The following is an unrehearsed interview with Gilbert Blackburn, who's a resident of a small neighborhood called Flat Rock. And this is for the Kentucky Bicentennial Oral History Project. The interview was conducted in his home on October 18, 1976 at 1:30. And this interview is covering the early or the origin of the Flat Rock community and some stories about the community itself.
Okay. Well, I have been asked to give a brief history of Flat Rock. First and foremost, in the minds of people down through the years, is where the community got the name Flat Rock. And me being the third oldest person in the community, I have been asked to write some of the history as best I have heard from our ancestors and what I have observed in my own lifetime. As to why the name Flat Rock was given it, I am at a loss to say more than through the center of the community there is a small creek which has a solid rock bottom, of rock about 3 inches thick, of one layer on top of another for several feet down. And that has been the theory of most people as far back as I can remember. However, there is another theory that about 1/2 mile to the east is the Fort Bluff, which is so named because it was an old Indian fort with much tillable land on top. And to follow that bluff about 1 mile north, you would find the peak of it with a wall of rock straight up, flat on top. And until recent years, a part of the old Indian fort was intact. Then a few hundred yards away is the Pinnacle, another rock straight up, flat on top, which made a wonderful lookout station for the Indians. It covers about 2 acres, and as a boy I found arrowheads by the dozens, both in the fields and woods. Rocks straight up and flat on top. Would that not be a legitimate reason for the name Flat Rock? The first public building in Flat Rock was a log schoolhouse built just almost where the present church stands. Some of the old foundation blocks were still there until recently, and was built on land donated by the Hilliards. As in fact, after the Civil War, the government was not able to pay its soldiers off, and the Hilliards taking theirs in land, several hundred acres. That is, as it was told to me by Miss Stella Hilliard, a school teacher and descendant of the older Hilliards. In fact, the whole village is on land formerly owned by the Hilliards. It was in that old log schoolhouse that the Flat Rock Cumberland Presbyterian Church organized October the 7th, 1865, had its beginning, with Reverend William C. Love as pastor, at a salary of $25 for 6 months, with a membership of 40 people. The first elders were John W. Harper, Samuel W. Moore, and Linford Harper, with Linford Harper as clerk. After a period of years, the church bought a building just west of the present building and worshiped there until the present building was erected in 1892 with Uncle Walter McChesney as head carpenter. Then again, our present church was remodeled in 1954 with Henry Wigington as head carpenter. Our present pastor is William Perkins. Our eldership consists of Sylvan Wynn, Clarence Harper, Charles Harper, Richard Rowland, Kermit Rowland, Mitchell Cliff, John W. Blackburn, and Gilbert Blackburn. with Kermit Rowland as clerk of the session. Now back to the school situation. The Hilliards again donated land across the creek and on the old Flynn's Ferry Road, an old Indian trail and one of the oldest roads in the state of Kentucky, for another school which was also a one-room school. Then, in a period of about 60 years, it was replaced with a two-room school, and in 1917, that was replaced with a high school with an enrollment of 150 or better, which made Flat Rock very outstanding as an educational center for a period of years as a country high school. And that lasted until about 1945, then went back to grade school, then to consolidation in 1954, which seemed to take the very life out of our community. May I just say, anytime you take something out of a community, it just seems to have something to do with life in the community, and I hope by that you don't consider me a pessimist. Now, while we're on the subject of schools, may I give you a brief history of some of the accomplishments of the Flat Rock School. First, let me say that the farms were eventually divided into smaller farms, and the families were nearly all large. And that kept every man, woman, boy, and girl busy with their farm work and chores each and every day. Even the cows had to be milked on Sunday, yet they found time to get a reasonable education. Now, what did Flat Rock School produce? First, in the Andrews Pickard family of 13, it produced 8 teachers, 1 doctor, Dr. Luther J. Spickard. The Jimmy Spickard family of 11 produced 5 teachers. The Stone family, 2 teachers. In the Harper generation, 7 families of them produced 6 teachers. Of all the generation of Moores, there were 3 teachers, 3 ministers, and 1 doctor, Dr. Jesse Moore. And of the Hilliards, there was 1 teacher. Of the Stevensons, there were 2 teachers. Of the Thompsons, there were 1 teacher. The Cliffs produced 1 teacher, 1 sheriff, Mitchell Cliff. And in addition to the ministers that were produced, Reverend Ray Wigington is also one that the Flat Rock School produced. The Blackburns produced mostly farmers, with 1 sawmill and wheat thresher man who later became sheriff. That was Presley J. Blackburn. Then he became postmaster at Princeton. The Ashers were quite aggressive by taking part in all church and school activities and donating the land which is now Asher Cemetery, and the Rowlands has given of their time and talent to all church and school affairs and has donated land for the Rowland Cemetery, one of the most beautiful of all country cemeteries. The first store ever to be in Flat Rock was built by Uncle J.T. Morgan. Up until that time, people had to go to Fredonia for their mail. But he put in a post office and named it Ruth, after one of his daughters. It was right next to the school and was a 2-story building with store and living quarters built together. He had a line of general merchandise, such as a few grocery items, yard goods, calico, gingham, and domestic, and also a few items for men, such as plug tobacco. the plug about 1 foot long, and with the old tobacco knife with a lever would cut you whatever amount you wanted, usually a nickel or dime's worth. For a dime, you would get quite a plug. He also had a broom machine, and people would bring their broom corn in, and he would make their brooms just as nice as any you could buy any place. That store still remained the source of our mail until 1903, when we got rural free delivery. Flat Rock had a sawmill, a grist mill, a blacksmith shop, a cider mill, and in 1903 we had a second store go up on the site where the present store is today, built by James A. Cliff, and has been lively ever since. Most families raised about all they had to eat except sugar, salt, pepper, and soda. Or sometimes, if they wanted to splurge a little, we would buy some salmon and cheese and crackers. Most farmers had orchards, and a few sometimes might use the juice of the apple for a little different purpose than for cider or vinegar. Then sometimes you might need to buy some corn, and might be asked the question, do you want it by the bushel or by the jug? I remember the old hooped skirts, though my mother or 2 sisters did not wear them. But older women wore Mother Hubbards, hanging loosely from the shoulders down, probably 3 yards around the bottom. The girls in those days wore waists and skirts, all hanging loosely, with a petticoat tight around the waist, with a button on the side, and if they ever bursted a button, they were in serious trouble. And I have seen that happen twice, once in the schoolroom and once outside the church door. They wore a tight bodice to hold themselves down, with bustles around inside the waist to hold the waist out so as to never show their form. A bra or slack suit would have been a sin to the crickets in those days, and shorts would have been out of the question. The girls also wore wraps in their hair. It was made of hair they saved from combing, and was made in a crescent shape, large in the center, and came to a point at each end. They would comb their hair forward, place the wrap on the front part of the head, then comb the hair back over the wrap, braid up what was left, and with hairpins place the braids round and around the head. It was then they had a perfect hairdo, all of their very own making. The young girls wore their dresses about halfway between ankle and knee until they were about 14. Then as they grew older, they would lengthen them. That was to let the boys know they were becoming a mature woman and was about ready for some boy to come along and pop the question. Now, what about boys? I was about 13 before I had my first pair of long pants, a real store-bought complete suit. Boy, can you imagine that? Then later on, I got me a stiff-brimmed sailor straw hat. Then I was really set out for the girl. But I didn't have much success until in a few years I got me a buggy, for that is what it took me to make a hit with the girls in those days. I went to parting my hair in the middle until I heard a preacher say, these fellows that part their hair in the middle has to part it that way to balance their brains. Then I went to parting it on the side again. But then I didn't want my brains to be one-sided, so